Moving on to our second keynote presentation. This is Daniel Robles. Daniel has a professional engineering certification in the United States, and he has an MBA, Master of Business Administration. He is the founder and executive director of the Integrated Engineering Blockchain Consortium, IEBC. IEBC is a worldwide network of engineering professionals building blockchain applications to the engineering profession. IEBC has authored seminal papers on this topic for the National Society of Professional Engineers, National Association of Insurance Commissioners, and recently won the CAASE International Grand Challenge Innovation Award in New Technology category. IEBC is cited widely across international engineering publications, white papers, academic research. Mr. Robles' career spans over 30 years across diverse industries, including aerospace, construction, international education for companies such as Boeing, Hughes, Northrop, and he even was in Hollywood developing mechanical special effects. I'd like to introduce Daniel Robles.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is a tremendous honor to be here. I know Rod from Boeing, and it's good to be here with Rod because he's always been the type of person who brings people up with him. So he always carries along protege. And I happen to have been a very lucky member of his group at the Boeing company. So it's just great to be back here and working with this group and visiting you all. One of the reasons why we're cited so much is because we're the only ones doing it. It's not that we're really up in the, really knocking this stuff out. There's so few engineers in this domain. It's all dominated by financial companies and by insurance companies, and I'll show you why. But the conclusion we'll get to is that blockchain will not and cannot reach its full potential until the engineers get involved. And there's a very interesting reason for this. So this discussion is, do I have an agenda here? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell some stories. Because that's the best way to, it's such a broad topic. It goes in so many different directions. It's a spider web, there's hype, there's truth, there's manipulation of truth. There's all kinds of stuff out there. There's a lot of money involved. When you get money involved, that tends to spin things out of control. So we're going to tell some stories, and then we're going to talk about a brief history of blockchain. We're not going to get into the details. The mathematics are involved, but we're not going to get into that. We're going to get some fun facts. We'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of blockchain and why it works. And across this out, why we shouldn't be worried. Because we shouldn't be at all. Why we should be excited is that there's a big opportunity, but it's not what you expect. And then finally, what can we all do about it? Here? Okay, so let me stay by the mic so I can't run around. That's probably good. Okay, as you probably predicted, it all starts with beer. This is the Engineering Student Council of University of New Haven in 1985. What happened was that I was president of the ASME, and we went to the student government and said, hey, we want to take some of these trips to these factories, and we give us some money, we pay for these trips. It's okay, here's 25 bucks. 25 bucks, are you kidding me? Yeah, for the whole year. No, wait a minute, you just gave that fraternity 500 bucks to throw a beer party, and you're giving us $25 for our entire program. So they said, yeah, because that's what we always do. So I went back to the other engineering groups, the ASCE, the IEEE, the software engineers, and I said, hey guys, look, this is nuts. Let's get together. And overnight we became the largest organization on campus. We were also associated with a lot of the funders of the university. So we had a little meeting with the provost, and before you know it, we had plenty of money for beer. And our trips, by the way. So the first lesson you learn is that, together, collaboration, multidisciplinary collaboration is so important. And this is all in a domain of business where, at the time, it was hyper-competitive. competitiveness. There was Michael Porter out there publishing in 5 Forces of Ultra Competitiveness, and here we are saying, well, no, wait a minute, you collaborate and you form a network, and this is more efficient. It's not better or worse, it's more efficient, and engineers, we like efficiency. Again, so the Integrated Engineering Blockchain Consortium, I credit it to many different teams that I've been working with. It's not me, it's other people that have contributed so much to this that we've arrived at this position today. One of our, like Rodney said, I did work in Hollywood. And let me just mention something about Hollywood, which is really, really interesting. Do you know those credits at the end of the movie? They kind of go by way too fast for anybody to read. And you're wondering, what are those there for? I can't read it, it's going by too fast. Well, that isn't for your benefit. Those credits are not for your benefit. Those credits are for the benefit of Hollywood. And what happens with those credits is what you're doing mechanically is every 24 frames per second, you're imprinting that person's name on a different section of that frame every 24 seconds as it scrolls by. You kind of see how that works. And then you're making it indelible, and it cannot be changed. So if I want to lie on my resume, for example, I would have to cheat that scrolling thing, and I would have to somehow change the name on all 50 or 200 frames I show up in. Not only that, they distributed that video all across the world. So I would have to go out to every single DVD, and I would have to get in there and manipulate every single one of them in order for me to execute that corruption. Okay, so you can see how it kind of serves the purpose of a blockchain, because the cost of corrupting it far exceeds the value that you gain from it. So in this manner, you get a lot of a different dynamic. Working in Hollywood is different because everybody's so committed to getting that project done, because they need to get that movie, has to be a blockbuster hit, because their next job is dependent on it. Okay, and the whole thing about Hollywood is you got to be on those credits, or you have to know somebody who's on those credits, because if they validate you, that's their whole knowledge management system. And it's different, it's not better or worse, but it operates in a very interesting way. So that's something I want to bring up. And then after that, I worked on shuttle and so forth, but after that, I went to NAFTA. I got involved with the NAFTA Mutual Recognition document. This was just a great trade agreement where they tried to get engineering services to trade like you know, any kind of service, like product services across the border between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And this was back in 1995. And so I thought, well, gosh, I was in between jobs. I think I'll go down there and figure out what this is all about, and maybe there'll be some opportunities. And I took a job at a small engineering school, very progressive, fine engineering school. And when you first go into Mexico, and this is back 25 years, the first impression you get is, my gosh, the infrastructure is terrible. And then the second thing you think is, boy, those engineers must be hard. And you just start sulking. Oh my goodness, what are we getting ourselves into? But then I was there, and I worked with the students, and I noticed that they were exceptionally smart. I mean, and creative. And the disconnect was, I couldn't handle it. I'm like, wait a minute. Bad infrastructure, awesome engineers, where's the problem here? So what I did was I took these engineers, and I sent them to the American US board exams, the EIT. And they passed at an extraordinary level. And by the time we started taking a random sample of all the engineers, not just from this very good university, but from all the engineers in the community, and they still maintained a pass ratio consistent or similar to the Americans, with the language disparity. But there was nothing wrong with the engineers at all. What it turned out was that there's this really interesting dynamic. It's a virtuous circle between finance, insurance, and engineering. Okay, a bank will not finance a project unless it's insured. An insurance company will not insure a project unless it's properly engineered. And you can't do proper engineering unless there's financing to cover the soft costs. Okay, so it's this virtuous circle. It's like a three-legged stool. You knock out one of those legs and the whole thing comes down. So when you look at a country like Mexico, the problem is not the engineers, the problem was the immature financial institutions. Okay, so this is a very interesting thing that we learned. So what happened was we measured the engineers differently. That's all we did. And all the engineers from our program went on to get jobs with multinational corporations. In fact, one of those engineers later at Boeing became my manager. So, you know you're doing something right when that happens. So that was something that we learned along the way. I'm sorry, I'm going to stay here. Yes, I'm going to stay here. Okay, the next, so then I went to Boeing, okay, and Boeing, I got involved with these, I had my regular job, but then I got involved with the technical fellowship, and they were trying to solve these problems of, like the employment gap. There was a lot of very young engineers, there were a lot of very senior engineers, and there was nothing in the middle. So they're trying to how do you get these folks to talk to those folks and try to get them to educate each other, when the older engineers were trying to protect their jobs, or hoarding information. The younger engineers, they just wanted to go do stuff. So how do you bring these two bodies together? So what we did was we ended up creating in the internship program, we created this mutual learning scenario so that an older engineer could learn new technology from a younger engineer, like how to start a website and how to, what's the social media thing all about. And then we bring these two groups together, and then they start sharing. They have a mutual exchange between them. And some of the communications were just simply profound. Some of the older engineers, they had kids who weren't making proper choices, and they would ask the younger engineers what to do about it. So it's far greater, far deeper than just engineering. And then you bring this to management at Boeing, and they say, okay, what's the ROI? Well, what ROI? This is beautiful stuff. People are communicating. They're getting to know each other, transfer of information. No, I need to see ROI. Measure it. Well, how can I measure it? So that was a big problem. How do you measure something like that? And how do you put it into a construct that can be digested by the financial side of things? So that was interesting. That's when we met. Jim Robles was there too, right, Rodney? And he was doing work with Second Life, was that virtual game that he was trying to model and simulate using these social programs. And there was a social problem we're trying to get at. Then later on, I left and I started the Genesis Project. I started publishing a lot of ideas like this. And then I started a company called Social Flights with some other partners. And that was a ride-sharing service for jets. So a lot of private jets are flying around half empty as they deliver their cargo to whatever location of their executive, and they're flying back empty. And we're saying, hey, maybe we could sell those seats. But there's so many variables involved, like the crew times, how much they can fly, the FAA regulations, air traffic control, availability, short-term cancellations, all these things. So if you tried to build a business model on these discrete events, trying to script out something like that, it just didn't work. Okay, you could not close that business plan. However, if you looked at it in terms of probabilities, so what's the probability that I can find somebody at this location who wants to go to that location within a certain period of time, then you start seeing some sense in the numbers. You start to see, wait a minute, now we can start doing this. Now we can actually impact the probability that something can happen. So now the people running the company could know what to do next to impact these probabilities, and then it all comes out in the wash later as a viable business plan. Okay, so we are acquired by another company, but we learned a whole lot doing that. My goodness. Finally, we went to, then I started a company called Co-Engineers, PLC. Now that was my own personal engineering consulting firm, and we were working in the construction industry. And in the construction industry, we had a very similar problem because what's happening on a construction site is so complex. The wallboard guy doesn't show up, and then the plumbers get stuck in traffic, and then you have to redo the schedule. So you could never really script a program. And if you did script a program, it would just fall apart by the end of the day. However, you could start looking at it again in terms of probabilities. Or you could start looking at the points where risk is transferred from one entity to another entity. And those became your hard points. So you start managing those hard points. You start managing risk. You're not managing ROI anymore. You're looking at risk. And you're managing it with some proper risk equations, with some proper mathematics, some actuarial math, and quantitative analysis can now be applied as long as you have these points that you can measure and isolate, and you have a time function. Okay, you have a clock. It's going clock, and everybody's synchronized to this clock. You can get the job done that way. So we started publishing on this stuff, and one thing at Co-Engineers we found out, this is just about the time when blockchain started getting famous. So we built this little cryptocurrency. You can make a cryptocurrency, any one of you could have one in 20 minutes. And we built a cryptocurrency called the Quant. It was on the BitShares blockchain. And the problem we had was engineers were hiring each other. So we were independent engineers. So I would hire Rodney, this is literally, but I would hire Rodney, he would hire me, and then at the end of the month we would have to settle. So you need sort of this merchant currency, something to keep track of who did what for whom, and then at the end of the month or into the quarter, you'd settle. So we used this electronic token called a quant, and we started trading these among all the engineers, and they'd all settle out, and it was all electronic spreadsheet, it was all public so everybody could see it, it was on a blockchain. Wow, this is pretty slick. And what ended up happening was these engineers started to trade among themselves and say, look, you ever had that situation where you go, somebody says to you, hey, I want to pick your brain, let me buy you a cup of coffee. And you're saying, okay, well, wait a minute, a cup of coffee is $2, and my brain's worth like $100 an hour, and no way. But you do it anyway because you like the person. But when you exchange a token between somebody, this digital token, hey, I'll give you 100 quant if you show me how you analyze that piping material. Show me where those failures are going to show up in 5 years on that polypropylene pipe. Where do you get this information? There's no books published on it. You have to find the person who has it and get them to sit down and give up their secrets. So you give them the quant. And we found out that engineers are willing to spend 5 or 6 times more time with you if you're exchanging this little currency that has absolutely no value whatsoever. Then, as a matter of fact, the currency has less value than the cup of coffee. But they were spending more time with you with this currency than they were with the cup of coffee. So what's going on here? Well, the only thing we can say is we can't tell you what the value of that quant is. Only thing we could say is that quant is non-zero. The value is non-zero. What was happening is when I give you, when I ask for your time, you now have a claim on my time because you hold these tokens. And we've got this mutual reciprocity between us. So now you're putting my knowledge in the bank, essentially, with this exchange system. Okay, this is really, really interesting. This is the anthropology of cryptocurrencies, and we're just figuring this out. So this is how we're actually starting to run a company this way. And we're not involved. We're not trading Bitcoin. We're not involved in any of that. We're just kind of using these tools that are showing up for us. So we started publishing this information. We published the NSPE white paper, their position paper, and we're trying to say that, look, these cryptocurrencies, the way they're built, is very, very similar to the engineering process itself, to the PE process. When you have to have these validations, you have to take these exams, you have to have a mutable record, you have to have a stamp, which it puts finality on a drawing, and all these things. So we're saying, well, there's this major comparison here. So we published that white paper, and then for the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, we're telling them, hey, look, if you look at the world in terms of risk, now the engineers can be that third financial instrument if you were to measure us differently. Okay, instead of measuring us in terms of the stuff that we can produce, measure us in terms of the risk we can remove. Okay, just 2 different ways of measuring the same thing. Okay, so this is what that paper was all about. And it sort of makes sense, because, if you have a fireman, the value of a firefighter is $1 million an hour when there's a fire, because they're saving all this property. And other than that, they're not doing much. They're doing important stuff, but it's not $1 million an hour. But the fire protection engineer could design a building which will never burn. But if the building never burns, you've got no way to measure the value of that engineer. Right? If the building is burning, you can measure the value of the fireman, but you can't measure the value of the engineer. Okay, so these are kind of interesting things to talk about, especially in our profession, because we are the profession which does eliminate risk or remove risk. So then we spoke more about how quant worked at the ASCE challenge winner, and then the Integrated Engineering Blockchain Consortium we built out of the FinTech Task Force in the NSPE. So now we've got hundreds of members, and what we are doing is we are actually building a blockchain by engineers for engineers, okay? And now we just got some funding from Switzerland. We got partners called Blockhaus out of Switzerland. So this is just starting to take off, and it's really, really exciting, and this is what I'm doing now. In 2018, we're going to be actually releasing our blockchain in a couple of weeks. So you're probably asking yourself, what in the world is a blockchain? Well, the origins are not new. I mean, it wasn't invented in 2009 with Satoshi Nakamoto. You've heard the stories. It's not new. World War II cryptography. Multi-key signatures is very typical. You have a message, you lock it with one key, and you lock it with the other key, you toss the other key to the other person, they open it with that key, and then their private key is associated with your key mathematically, and that's how you secure packages. So it's nothing new. And then airplanes and spacecraft have been using voting computers. This is Airbus, and actually the Space Shuttle started with it. And Airbus, they use these voting computers. And what the computers, they have duplicate sensors out there, and they all read the different sensors. And then, in order, then you read, they all vote, which is the actual truth. And then you still can't secure the node. You still can't. The computer could be hacked. You would never know that. So they add a second step. It's voting on the vote. So now the computers have to vote that their vote was the vote that they voted. Okay? And if that vote is not unanimous, then you notify the pilot. Something's gone wrong. If it is unanimous, very high probability everything's going fine, even if they're disagreeing. So this is stuff that the engineers have been doing for decades. Blockchain, there's something called the Byzantine proof. That was invented by some consultants in the late 80s, but engineers have been doing it much longer than that. Then there's hashing functions. It's a traditional idea of cryptography. They take a message, they jumble it all up, and then you go to the other side and you have an algorithm which unjumbles it. So these are all components. But what came later was blockchain is the thing that came in 2009, which kind of combined all these technologies. So, you can get onto Google, and in a few minutes, you can have these same definitions that I have. Wikipedia, a blockchain is a decentralized, distributed, and public digital ledger that is used to record transactions across many computers so that their record cannot be altered without the alteration of all the subsequent blocks and the collusion of the network. My gosh, that sounds, all those words fit together, but what does it really mean? Well, part of it means, like the thing in Hollywood, remember, you couldn't, that second part was the record cannot be altered retroactively without the alteration of all subsequent frames and the collusion of the network that's corrupting all the DVDs that have been distributed. Okay, so that's what blockchain does. That's very interesting. And then the dictionary.com has it's a digital ledger in which transactions made in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency are recorded chronologically and publicly. Wow, that sounds like what we were doing with co-engineers. We were recording these digital transactions. In my definition, which I like the best, is blockchain is a clumsy little dance that a computer needs to do in order to simulate something that humans have been doing for centuries. Okay, so these words make sense, they're interesting, but if you look at the underlying words, if you're just an engineer, you don't know anything, you look at decentralized, distributed, you're thinking, wow, that looks like a random sample, this distributed amount of data, and if I take a random sample from this, I can do some interesting analysis. That's what it is. Okay, if you look at recording transactions or record chronologically, that looks like a data logger, right? The paper goes by and the data loggers punch in little, that's exactly what that is. So you can simulate this human condition. So you start asking yourself, I don't think it was intentional, but those tools are baked into blockchain. Tools that we use every day, tools that we need for our build. So you have to start wondering, maybe there's a higher meaning, maybe there's something else we can do, not just Bitcoin. And that's where we're concentrating on. Now, you're probably wondering why I have that guy walking down the stairs like that. That's a computer, that's a robot walking down the stairs, and you all think that's just amazing. It's so cool, and you can sort of extrapolate on that, some future where robots are bringing breakfast in bed, or you're thinking, you're anthropomorphizing your motions on this technology, and that's where all the hype comes from. It really is, because people are seeing this technology and they're extrapolating into this other universe, and you get a lot of noise. So the signal-to-noise ratio is really poor out there right now. So a lot of people are confused. They don't know what's right, what's wrong. But we try to stick just to the engineering facts. That robot is not the best way to bring something up a flight of stairs. An elevator does the same job. Okay, so it's also to say that you don't need blockchain in a lot of situations where you may think you need blockchain. However, using blockchain where you do need it can be enormously effective. Okay, but that's not the easiest way to solve that problem. But it is the one that everybody gets excited about, everybody puts their money down on. Nobody's buying an elevator, it does the same thing. So that's kind of try to put the rationality, or put put some sense to all this. So what problem does blockchain solve? It's a handshake. That's all it is. It's if you think back to early, I don't know, maybe 1400s market. Okay, there's a central market. People don't really know each other. They come from miles around to trade their chickens and their corn and so forth. And you want to trade your chicken with somebody. You want some corn. You go up to the guy, you never met him, and you guys hold hands. You put the chicken on the table, he puts the corn on the table, you inspect the corn, he inspects the chicken, you guys think it's a good deal, you grab the corn, he grabs the chicken, you release hands. And the reason is there's always some point when somebody can grab the chicken and the corn and run away. Okay? So you have these actually, I'm not even sure if that's where the handshake came from. I completely made that up. But it works, kind of, for this. But that's kind of how it works. So there's this period of time where it's like an escrow service or something like that. So that's the problem that it solves. Except instead of not using chickens and corn, you're using contracts. So the problem now is if I issue a contract digitally and I send the contract to you, sir, we both now have the same identical contract. And he can change the terms, I can change the terms, and there's no way to determine who's got the valid contract. Okay, there's no way to do that. So this is what's limiting a lot of what's happening in computers, because databases just don't talk to each other. They can't talk to each other. Okay, so you need a different type of database, a fundamentally different type of database. So that idea of contracts, that's also very good for money, because if there's always that double spend problem. Same here. Even if there's a microsecond when the accounting system is adding it to one account and subtracting to the other account, if there's even a nanosecond in between, somebody's going to write a bot to grab that money. Okay, so you have to have things working kind of backwards. You can't go retroactive. So this is what a blockchain accomplishes. And here's the little dance that it does to do so. I know it looks really silly, but it is kind of silly. So anyway, you've got this a chain of vaults. Consider a chain of vaults. And there's 3 rules. The computer makes these 3 rules. The combination for each locker is stored in the prior locker. That's simple enough. Each combination can only be used once. I can accept that. No 2 lockers can be opened at the same time. That's pretty easy. These are really easy rules for a computer to make. So what happens is, assume one door is open. Now I want to open the next door, so I reach in, I grab the combination. I try to open a door, it won't open. Oh, I got to close this door first. So I close that door. Now the combination opens this door. And then people start throwing their, you can throw your contract or whatever in there. That vault is open. You throw away the key because you can't use it anymore. You have to take that key out, and then you have to close that door and open up the next key like this. You kind of do this, and that assures that it only goes in one direction, and it assures that no 2 blocks are open at the same time. So your contract has to be time-stamped at a different time than mine. So that makes yours most valid than mine. So everybody understands this, and everybody accepts this, and this becomes the consensus. Everybody is in consensus that this is working properly, and that contract comes before my contract, therefore his is valid, it's not mine. Okay, so that's what it does. But you need to somehow get that thing to happen. Who's going to be doing the combination? Who's opening those locks? Who's doing that door stuff? You have to have some disinterested party, somebody who doesn't have access to the content or doesn't want access to the contents. So they have these things called miners. And instead of using a key to open a lock, they have these mathematical puzzles. So the miners, they get there and they start solving these puzzles. And the faster they can solve, the first one to solve the puzzle is the one who gets to open the door. You open the door and you get some Bitcoin. And now you've got these tokens that mean almost nothing. And this continues, so your challenge is to earn these tokens. Now, if Bitcoin did not have value, there would be no way to compensate people for performing this task of solving puzzles. They're trivial puzzles. But the fact that the Bitcoin has value is what's keeping this thing alive. And the day that the Bitcoin goes below the cost of producing these blocks, the electricity, is the day that it goes bankrupt. Nobody's going to do it anymore, or they're going to shift to another. So we've never been there. We don't know what that looks like. So that's all stuff that's in the future. But that's how the coin comes into existence. It's a function of mining. Now, fun facts. $100 worth of Bitcoin in 2010 is now worth $14 million today. How did that happen? Bitcoin market cap is $250 billion. The total cryptocurrency market cap is about $500 billion. But only 1,000 people control 40% of Bitcoin. Doesn't sound very decentralized, does it? Well, it's supposed to be very decentralized, but things are happening, things we never expected. FinTech VC, venture capital-backed FinTech investment is close to $16.6 billion. These are banks. Of course, banks are really scared of this stuff because it pretty much wipes out everything they do. All the administration and all the funding and all the fees that they get. You don't need to pay those fees anymore. So they're trying to incorporate it, trying to adopt it. InsurTech is looking at it a little bit differently because it's very time and people intensive, insurance and that business, and they can do that on a blockchain they perceive better. EngTech, almost nothing. Engineering, nobody is, I don't see any, I'm the only one talking about that I know of, in the professional engineering domain at least. And we've approached many companies, and a lot of them are very scared of this thing. If you're a government contractor and you're talking about cryptocurrencies, you don't want to go sideways with the government about money, so it just has bad optics. Or construction is kind of rife with corruption, and any other form of transfer, especially internationally, any other form of transferring money or value, it's a bad optics. So for some reason, we're really holding back while everybody else is really moving forward. But at the end of the day, a Bitcoin is a change of state. It's nothing more. It has no value. It's got no intrinsic value. It's an electron. It's a joule. That's a problem. That's a persistent problem. And more fun facts, if you look at, they're calling it money, and if you look at but don't worry too much about it just yet. You see Bitcoin is that really small dot at the end, and the total world money is 83 point some odd trillion dollars. That's out of scale, by the way, because that little dot at the bottom should be about 1/2000th of the big dot. So you see there's a lot of ways to go before Bitcoin is dominating everything. But on the other hand, you look at the global debt record. Okay, so we owe ourselves 5 times or 3 times more money than we have that exists on Earth. So until we have a free trade agreement with Mars or something, we're stuck. All right. So people are seeing an adjustment is going to happen. And if you look at money, it's pretty much a digital token anyway, except it's backed by the institutions of government. And if blockchain is a digital token, or Bitcoin is a digital token, and money is kind of a digital token, what's the difference between the two? Okay, so if you compare the two, assume they're both digital tokens with no intrinsic value. Banks are, the institutions that support banks include the legal system. So if you don't pay your debts, the marshal comes and takes your house. And it's supported by the legal system. There's punitive regulations, there's double entry accounting standards and methods, there's courts, jurisdictions, lawyers, and uniform commercial code, all to keep that game fair. This is all very, very expensive stuff. Now, if you can do the same thing with a blockchain, it's very, very efficient. Okay, it's not to say that a blockchain is perfect. There are some severe problems with a blockchain, and I'm going to talk about that next. The problem is this idea of intrinsic value. It has no, at the end of the day, that token is only worth what you can do with Bitcoin that you can't do without Bitcoin. It's a lot, but it's not really intrinsic. Okay, so this is where we come in. So, reconciling the physical world with the virtual world is enormous. This is the thing which is not being paid as much attention to as it really should be. And if you look at things like artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence is a fantastic site, but you eventually have to calibrate it to some group of experts. Well, where are you going to find those experts? Who are those experts? What's the consensus that that expert is in fact an expert? And now you're going to have them calibrating your virtual reality, your artificial intelligence. If it's if you start with bad data, you're going to get bad data. And I think that's how it works. I'm not an expert, but Internet of Things as well. You're going to put 1 billion sensors and everything, but you're going to have to locate those sensors, you have to manufacture, you have to maintain them, you have to program, you have to attend to them, you have to replace them, you have to watch out for all these different, one interfering with another, and sensors interfering with each other, the internet goes down. I mean, you can't go very far before you're running into an engineer, okay, to fix this stuff. Smart contracts, well, smart contracts about what? I mean, I could take a smart contract, put on a ladder, and it's not going to change the light bulb. So the contract itself is not intrinsic, but the person is. So we cannot escape that idea of personhood. And I think some of these questions we're asking about security and and how do you get the talent you need, how do you validate talent, and so forth. Another big one is collateralization. When a bank makes a security, when they build a security, it has to be backed by some sort of collateral. Otherwise, the security just ceases to exist. And this is what happened in the 2008 financial crisis. I mean, when the asset was somehow divorced from the security that was underwritten by it, then you couldn't value the asset anymore. You had to mark to market, and market was failing. So it turned into this huge correction. It was only because you had somehow divorced the security from the physical world. Okay, so the big need in the future is validating the physical state of the world. And that data is what's going to go into these new electronic contracts. And that's where the intrinsic value is going to be coming from. It has to come from humans, somewhere, somehow. And engineers are the ones who are the most qualified to assess physical state, because the laws of physical state do not change anywhere on the planet. Okay, it is what it is. Gravity and mass do what they do, and there's no debate. There's huge consensus on this. So it's a very, very powerful situation that we find ourselves in, and it's one that we should really consider taking full advantage of. Now you look at the digital twin idea. You look at all these components, operational history. Well, that's got to be gathered by an engineer. It's got to be put on a chronology. Operation history has a time function. You have to register this stuff on some sort of database somewhere. Aggregate data, the real-time operational data. If you had one single database that was secure and that you could just sort of throw your data up on like a dart, and it's like a moving background, and then you can analyze it later, that's what blockchain provides us. Right now in manufacturing, you have a part going down the assembly line, there's a stack of paper that's associated with that part, and the cost of the paper is often more than the cost of the part, because you don't have that, and then the databases don't talk to each other. So how did the things get there in the first place? So Internet of Things, question for you: how did the thing get there in the first place? Well, it's engineering. Can there be artificial intelligence without actual intelligence? I don't think so. What makes smart contracts smart? Okay, so these are like the fire protection engineer. It's unmeasured. You're invisible. This is all invisible value. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure that value into existence. Okay. So the digital twin, and I just went over that. So this is what we're building. It's called Co-Engineers. It's a blockchain by engineers for engineers, and it's we see a future of engineering where we are. How would you say, we're competing for commodity pricing, because our value is wrapped up in the value of the product that we make. It's hard to discern how to separate that. Meanwhile, you've got these networks like Google and Uber and Facebook and Twitter. They're decentralized platforms. Okay, what they do is they aggregate data. That's all they do, and they don't actually create anything, but they're able to extract all that data from it. Well, the opportunity that we have is to become a platform as an engineering profession, or we remain as a commodity. And let me show you how that works. There was a guy named Robert Solow who won the Nobel Prize for his research in estimating the contribution that technological change has on economic growth. And he found that 80% of economic growth was attributable to technological change. That's what engineers do. The problem is that it was incorrectly allocated to land, labor, and capital. That's the 18th century traditional economic theory that we all learned. So all this value that engineers create and produce is being allocated to things that don't produce that same quantity or that same percentage. I don't want to watch my words here, but we're getting ripped off. Okay. However, the problem is that innovation can't be measured directly. That fire protection engineer, you can't measure that person directly. However, if you measure them in terms of risk, you've got a whole different game. Okay, so now you go back to that thing that we learned in Mexico where the bank will not lend money unless the asset's insured. Insurance company will not insure assets until it's properly engineered, and the properly engineering must be financed to cover soft costs. If you take and create a financial instrument out of the engineering profession, which is measured by the amount of risk that we remove from a system, like the airplanes, when you get an engineer involved in an airplane, it tends to stay up longer. Or the fire protection, or the roads, the bridges, the highways, the sensor, the building, the elevator, all that stuff. We're constantly removing risk from the system. Now, one of the companies we're working with is Jacobs Engineering, which is one of the world's largest engineering companies, and their idea is obsolescence insurance. If we could get an entire database and all the engineers contribute all the information about buildings that are out there, when the pump was replaced, when the piping was put in, when the elevator was inspected, it all goes into one database. We can now write an insurance product so that the owner can buy the insurance product and always have their building maintained. You can't do that now. Right now, there's these peaks and valleys where the owner has a breakdown and they have to call the crews in. It costs really a lot of money to fix the plumbing and the pump. So it's just a disaster out there. But we can do like what the medical insurance does. The CDC is a government agency which publishes all this data, and the insurance companies just take the data and they start writing policies. They know the mortality rate of smokers, they know the mortality rate of living in smog, congested areas, and so forth. So it's almost trivial once you have the data, this large, centralized database. So this is what we're trying to build, something that engineers can all contribute to in order to provide this data, which can now we can now apply big data to it. So Jacobs thinks that the trillions of dollars a year from a $7 trillion industry can be released to the economy if we were to develop this sort of application. And this is, they're one of our strongest proponents in an otherwise pretty sparse field. So risk is really easy to do. I mean, you have to be able to identify the risk exposure, right? Simple and easy. You need to determine the probability that that peril will manifest. It has to be a statistical probability. It has to be numerical. And that's what we did with social flights. Remember, we started looking at the world in terms of like probabilities instead of discrete events. Okay, so this is something that we can do. We have to be able to assess the consequences should they manifest. So if there is a hurricane, we have to understand, okay, what are the consequences? What's going to break down? What infrastructure is going to be damaged? And so I believe we're getting a little bit long, right? A little bit long. Okay, so I'm just going to jump to the end. What we're doing is we're creating this, it's a blockchain application where in order to, engineers would put data on this database and they would receive a token called mass. And then we receive another token called gravity. So what will happen is we make a claim and another engineer has to validate your claim. And together that becomes an asset. And that goes to the centralized database. And now you have this token, the person validating you has this other token. The M token can be sold in the market. So if you're an insurance company and you see a heavy storm season coming, then you would want to purchase these tokens so that you'll have access to the database before and after that event. Okay, so that's what gives the value, the token value. Okay, so now you're giving the engineers incentive to put this data on the database, or companies with legacy data can now put it on this database and get residuals. So in essence, you're paying royalties for engineering work, which has never been done before. Right now, you're paying time rental. And then what happens is that the IBOC will distribute will be the container of all this information, and it would sell that information back. It'll be anonymized, it'll be cleansed and anonymized, sell that back to the market, and then we'll buy more tokens. So it creates a cycle. At some point we retire, when the money enters the IBOC, or the mass enters the IBOC, we retire. So that if there's too much demand, then it brings more engineers in, which lowers the price. If the price is low, then people buy more data, it goes up. So it's a stable token. It's not designed for this astronomical speculation. So that's what we're doing, that's what we're launching. And tomorrow, the blockchain represents an enormous opportunity for the engineering profession to measure ourselves differently and appear differently to an economy. And engineering provides, the profession provides an enormous opportunity for blockchain. They don't have this physical assessment. They need it desperately. There will not be, it won't be successful without it. You can't continuously have virtual stuff traded. It doesn't work. The highest and best use for this and associated technologies won't happen until engineers organize themselves, like we did back in the beer hall, organize themselves and work together to build it for ourselves. And if we don't do it, somebody's going to do it to us, like a Google or an Amazon. I mean, Amazon's building rockets already. Well, anyway, that's it. We have a lot of people working with us. This is really, really exciting times. We're launching very soon, and I'll take any questions afterwards. And thank you for listening to this.
Any questions? Where to go?
Yeah, so from what I understand, the distributed ledger, maintaining it, has some scale issues. Can you comment on that?
The digital ledger has scale issues?
Distributed ledger, the basis for the blockchain, has some scale issues. And I was wondering if you could comment on where we are with that.
Well, we're not using a proof of work.
Please repeat the question.
Oh, the question you asked is the digital ledger has scaling issues. You know, how big can it get? How fast can it get? And how much throughput, he's probably assuming, how much throughput, how much data can you put through it? So he knows what he's asking. There's issues. We're not using something called a proof of work. We're using something called a proof of stake. And what that is it's a different proofing algorithm which doesn't use the electricity proof of work. It's a different proofing algorithm which provides a lot of security, much cheaper and much more reliably, and it solves the scaling problem. So we're using a different algorithm than Bitcoin and Ethereum even. They're slowed down. But our blockchain can process 10,000 transactions per second. We produce a block every 3 seconds, not like Bitcoin every 15 minutes. So it's very fast, very high throughput. And we haven't reached that scale yet. And from what I understand, EOS will be the next generation, which will easily exceed scaling. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Thumbs up.
More questions? Over there. Chief.
Have you considered using the engineering body of knowledge that Cloud was created in the last slide to use for training?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason I told those stories, okay, can we use the engineering body of knowledge for training? Well, absolutely. The reason I told those stories is because it's impossible to list all the different things you can do with this. You've got a time function, you've got a random sample of data, and you've got all the engineering knowledge in the world. What can't you do with that? So I can't specify everything you can do with it. Well, we're trying to create a utility. And so it's a plug in the wall, and companies like yours or anybody else, they put the toaster in, they figure out what they're going to use it for, but we're just going to create and provide that one very simple thing as good and as fast as we can, and then let the entrepreneurs start building on it. The insurance products, micro-insurance, instant insurance, temporary insurance, all the things you can do now with this that you couldn't do without it, just staggering. So we're not going to try to get to that, we're just going to try to work on getting that utility right.
Questions?
Were you ever able to show an ROI for that collaborative environment you had at Boeing? Because I think that's probably a universal problem for a lot of people in this room, is, the bean counters don't value that because you can't sell it.
Right, and that's going to be the problem throughout this entire world until, and only until, you measure yourselves differently. Okay, so if I was to tell them, okay, you remove 83% of risk to your bottom line, they'd be like, I'm all over it. But if you tell them you're going to earn, $14 more per airplane, shrug their shoulders. But it's probably the same thing. It's weird that way. But you have to, in order to match the ROI, you have to measure yourself differently. That's all there is to it. Like that one engineer from Mexico who became my boss at Boeing. How'd that happen? We just measured them differently. They're the same engineers, same people, same border. But we measure them differently and everything changes. And that's what I'm trying to get to, is this point where, hey, let's stop playing this race to the bottom thing, with this global sourcing and all this stuff. I mean, it's killing us. We're all fighting with each other for jobs. That's not fun. We have to collaborate, and if we do that, we measure ourselves differently, Now we become a source of funds. We are not a sink of funds. You see what I mean? So everything changes, I hope. And this is why we're trying to get everybody excited.
More questions?
Just one quick one, very interesting, Dan. So you're really talking about capturing knowledge, right? Intellectual knowledge in your tokens, for lack of a better word.
Articulating it, yes.
Yeah. So have you talked with people about the issue of IP protection, and if I'm sharing something, and who can I share that with, and is it limited in terms of the people that I'm going to be able to do a transaction with?
Well, it goes back to the transaction record. So if you put a lot of information on there, your transaction record is pretty long. So if you want to gain access to a nuclear power plant, you could use your transaction record as a key to open that door. And that's been validated on a blockchain. And if you've got the proper education, experience, and validations from everybody along the line, and it's obvious you can't corrupt that blockchain, that door will open. If you don't have that key, if your transaction record does not match the door you're trying to go through, it won't open. Okay, so you've got these built-in mechanisms for encrypting who you are. So now you can manage the identity. So the IP situation is different because, if you want to preserve your IP, you have to go get a patent. And I got a patent once I tried, it cost like 40 grand. I abandoned it. I don't have time for that. And then, or the money for that, or the patent's dead in 3 weeks. It's static, it doesn't move, it's expensive. That system is not now the secret sauce. What combination of knowledge assets are required to create that transmission? Okay, that's what we're looking for now. We're not looking for the patent, we're looking for the creative content, the secret sauce, because you can duplicate that anywhere now. But the secret sauce, not the individual persons. But at the same token, you have to make sure that individual is getting paid adequately. So that's why we have this residual. You're getting paid. So when you put the content on the database and your content is being scraped for somebody else's usage, you get a micropayment. So your incentive now is to share the data because you're going to be getting residual income. And by the time you're our age, you should be doing pretty well. I mean, that's the way it's designed to work, by engineers for engineers, not by Wall Street for Wall Street. We're trying to build this for us and to assure those conditional situations. So,
Any more questions?
well,
I
thank you
think
very much.
I have a couple of questions, just to level set myself. So in terms of using blockchain for some of the existing environments that we're faced with today, I'll just pick on a couple. One, NAFEMS has a professional simulation engineer certification process. So it's my understanding that blockchain could be used in support of that, capturing the knowledge that's needed to achieve a certain level, for example, and then an individual reaches that level, etc., as they move up the scale. And in terms of sharing that information, the token is merely to keep it secure. So there's nothing to do with cryptocurrency whatsoever. So is that one simple application that blockchain might be considered for?
Well, absolutely. You actually said it yourself earlier when you said I should lay out some breadcrumbs for the people to find this room. That's what the token is. It's just a breadcrumb. It's a point in time that you can measure. Okay, so what you're talking about, what you would be, NAFEMS would become a validator. So you would make a claim that I took this course at NAFEMS. And now NAFEMS would be the validator who would validate your claim. Now you two are married on a blockchain, immutable forever. It cannot be taken away. Okay, so that's very, very simple. It eliminates a lot of administration, but it's indelible and nobody can say it didn't happen. So that would be the simplest thing. You become a validator and you receive tokens too, so now you're able to support your operations through your validation. And fees are never paid, fees are never transferred because there's this third party, the banks and the insurance companies, out there buying these tokens to access your data, which they're getting for free now, by the way.
Another simple example, I'll say, is think of an airplane. Each airplane has a tail number. So I can imagine a blockchain used for a tail number of an airplane, beginning with its initial design, through development, through testing, through certification, linking up worldwide partners in terms of the suppliers and who agrees to do what. So would that not be another simple application of blockchain, namely a digital thread, take it one more level, and then beyond that would be a digital twin?
Absolutely, but I want to caution that some people try to use blockchain for those little micro events, like the actual building of the airplane. What you want to do is find the right place for the blockchain. You have to use it correctly. So with all the things you mentioned, in my mind, those are points where risk is transferred from one entity to another. So when the architect or the designers give it up to the structure people, you want to be able to establish that transfer. Or when the owner buys the airplane, then you relinquish ownership of that airplane from the manufacturer to the owner. These points of risk transfer, where the insurance company takes this, those are the things you want to have on a blockchain. And that collection of risk transfer is going to tell a story. It's going to tell a story about the airplane. And then from those points, you can find all the records you need to go. So it's probably more of a hybrid, but to try to get, because to get a blockchain on the shop floor, it takes some computer science. It takes scripting. And the world doesn't script very well. And people are trying to do it in construction and they're failing. We think they're not going to do well. But you got to find the right point for it.
Right, and I meant for it to be at the major decision gates.
Absolutely.
Rather than for daily
Maintenance
operations.
records, collision records, everything.
Right.
Everything would go on this blockchain. And that's sort of the Carfax theory. Back in the old days when you bought a car, it was only, you drove off the parking lot, it was worth $5,000 less money because you had no idea where that car was in the last 2 seconds. Well, Carfax, by getting a few bits of data attached to that car, now the car can retain 80% of its value 5 years after it's sold because you've got those data that the odometer is correct, or there's never been a collision, or it wasn't in a flood zone. So that's where the efficiency comes into aircraft. Now this aircraft, even though it's the same make and model number, might be worth different than that aircraft based on that transaction record. So now you give the owner a motivation to maintain their aircraft. Now you give the manufacturer a motivation to increase the quality of their aircraft, and everybody gets paid for it. So there's all these upward factors, all these upward drivers, if you just structure it correctly. And don't get sucked into the hype about what it's going to change the world. Remember that guy walking up the stairs, that's not the best solution. Okay, but we can find the best solutions, the best applications.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. So at this point in our schedule, I encourage everybody to go next door, one way or the other, to the exhibition hall, that way, and network, and get ready for the next breakout. Thank you.